This morning's scripture reading is Jeremiah 17, verses 5 and 6. This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who depends on flesh for his strength, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. He will be like a bush in the wastelands. He will not see prosperity when it comes. He will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives.
Just in case.
Continuity can be unpredictable.
No doubt, especially this time of year. Really excited to get to be in front of you guys again. What a great opportunity to get to share the Lord's Word. Ironically, I think it's been 3 weeks ago that I was supposed to come and preach, and God had a different plan. And so 3 weeks ago, my son Baylor, it was his senior prom, and I was at prom. I had my assistant coach, Coach Yaniel Vidal. He was headed to the airport to pick up a couple of our guys that were coming back from Green Bay. And I get a call about 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock, and Coach Yaniel has had a flat tire on his way to go get the guys. And so I'm sitting there racking my brain trying to figure out, okay, what's the best thing to do? He's got a donut on the Lamar Community College car, and he's halfway to Denver. And so I sit there for a little bit, and in my line of work, there's a lot of problem solving. So you're just constantly kind of bombarded with different things that happen, and then you try to do your best to come up with the right solution. And so as I sit there with Kate and we're at prom, I said, I hate to send on a donut to go get the guys, and then he's still got to figure out somehow to get them home. And so I called Dennis late at night, and I start to drive away, and I said, Dennis, I got to go pick these guys up. I got to get them home. I just don't think I'll be able to make it. And I just appreciated his heart. He said, hey, we've got it. I think we got some preachers the next couple of weeks. But in 3 weeks, if you can come back and preach, we would love to have you. And I told him, I said, the sermon was going to be on Joseph. And I said, there's a lot of correlations with Joseph and just some things that have been going on in my life. I felt like God was leading me to preach about him. And it's amazing how 3 weeks later, same sermon, but now 2.5 weeks of different things have happened. So it's kind of taken a different twist, a different turn. And so I just feel like we talked about this morning in class, God's way is always perfect. It's always perfect. Sometimes you look at it and you say, hey, ironically, this happened. But in the end, God has had his hands on all of these things. And I can see that in the sermon as well. And so if you don't mind, let's start off in prayer, and then we can get right into this. Dear Lord, again, just appreciate the opportunity to come to the church, the family here in Walsenburg. I just ask that the lesson that you've given me, the lesson that's on my heart, that I can do an adequate job of giving your word, your thoughts, your light, the best I can. I know that Jaxon can mess it up, but I know that you are perfect. I just ask that this is something that people in here need to hear today, that hopefully will add value. But above that, dear Lord, we just ask that this church, and me included, takes your light, your word, and takes it to people throughout the week. That's what we've been called to do, because people more than ever need your love, they need your light, they need this message. I just ask that you are with this church, continue to grow them. Thank you again for allowing them to let me come in and preach. Be with us. In your son's name, amen. So like I said, 3 weeks ago, the sermon was a little different. I had entitled it, and kind of like we talked about the last time I was here, I pertain a lot of things back to what I do in basketball. So something we talk to our guys a lot about is we want you to be overdeveloped and underexposed. Overdeveloped and underexposed. And in today's world, that's a huge thing because with social media and Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and probably a whole lot of them that I don't even know about, a lot of times that gets flipped. And so you get a lot of young men that are overexposed and underdeveloped. And so if you're constantly putting out on Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, all these things you can do, but you're not really spending the time on the meat and potatoes of what you need to be doing, then all of a sudden you can get exposed. And so again, that's the title of this sermon is be overdeveloped and underexposed. That being said, we all know that the very best route for us to become as developed as we need to be in our life, in our Christian walk, is God. God's got it. Like if Jaxon tries to take over and say, hey, I'm going to do these things so that I can really get myself in position so that I can give this sermon today, I'm going to mess it up. God is the perfect developer. He knows exactly what we need, not always what we want. I'll reiterate that, not always what we want, but he can give us exactly what we need so that we can be prepared for whatever comes our way. And so 3 weeks ago, whenever I started this sermon, I had just gotten a call from Brody Robinson. And Brody Robinson was a kid that played for me at Garden City. He was an All-American, unbelievable little point guard. And he was trying to get a year back. And so he said, Coach, I need you to pray for me. He says, I'm really concerned. I don't think I'm going to get my year back. I don't know what to do. So we prayed for a week, and I just kept in constant communication with him. And at the end of the week, then he called me, and he said, Coach, it didn't go through. They're not going to give me my year back. I'm a little bit lost. And I just told him, I said, Brody, I know this. Everything that you've done up to this point has got you prepared for what's going to happen next. And he looked right, or didn't look at me. We were talking on the phone. He said, Coach, I know this. God never makes mistakes. And so that was what was leading into the sermon that I was bringing you guys as that week happened. And so at the end of the sermon, I'm going to tell you something that happened this last week that I'm like, God, you're perfect, and you knew this was going to happen. I created this sermon for the Church of Christ at Walsenburg, but it helped prepare me for another young man in a completely different circumstance. So as I thought about that, and I thought back to Brody, I thought about some of the guys I coach, you talk to a lot of these guys about, hey, here in JUCO, where it's really, really hard, there are some beautiful things that can happen. You probably didn't want to be here, but maybe you needed to be here. God's got you here for a reason, for a purpose that's maybe bigger than anything you even know. But I'll tell you this, if you handle it the right way, as you get done and you get to your next spot, you're going to have a great confidence because of the hard stuff we do here. Because everything's hard here. We don't have money. We have to work extremely hard in everything we do. And we take a lot of pride in that. But that can lead you to have great confidence when you get to your next spot. Because when other people come in and they say, at the Division I spot, hopefully is what they're hoping, they say, man, it's hard here. This is difficult. And you say, this is nothing. I look at my son Cooper, who went through 2 years of that at JUCO. And Cooper and I talk about this a lot. He saw things there that he's like, I've got great confidence. I can do whatever I need to do because of the hard things I had to go through. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted to go through, but God knew that I needed it. And because of that, it gives me great confidence. It gives me the ability to maybe do some things I couldn't do without it. And so JJ gave me this verse today, and I said, that's perfect. That's the verse as we go into the story of Joseph, who I think is a great example of what we're talking about here today, about being overdeveloped and underexposed. So JJ said, Proverbs 16:9, a man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. So again, a man's heart, we come up with a lot of different plans. I'm going to do this. This is what I think I need to do. Maybe I have a vision for where I want to be, but God directs the steps. God directs the steps. And if he directs the steps, we're going to end up exactly where we need to be. But better than that, we're going to be prepared for that moment. So back to Joseph. And again, we're going to talk about Joseph and his story. I think it's exactly, kind of like what I'd like to get to with this. If we will look at Genesis chapter 37, I'm going to grab my phone because it's got my Bible on it. Again, Genesis chapter 37, then we'll start there. I got to grab my phone. So I've got my Bible. So probably, I would assume most of us know the story. But again, I just think sometimes for me, as I know the story, but then I go back through it, there's things that God puts on my heart. There's things that speak to me that I go, I didn't know that. And so there's a few of those aha moments in this story. But as we start the story, one thing I was trying to do better this round than the first round, I always want to improve, is I need to be more in the Bible and less just Jaxon speaking. So we'll definitely get into this, but I'm also not going to take you through the entire story. But let's start off with Genesis chapter 37:1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. Again, the land was promised. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to the dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So he had another dream, and he told his brothers, "Listen, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you've had? Will your mother and I and all your brothers actually come and bow down to you, or bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And so we open up with Joseph. I've always thought it's interesting. I don't know if you guys know the difference between IQ and EQ. IQ, I think most of us kind of understand, can be tested. It's a quotient or a way to kind of figure out what you know through books, science, math, all these different things. EQ is the ability to read the room. EQ is the ability to understand like what you probably should say and what you probably shouldn't say. And a lot of people say that the EQ is like a bigger determinant of highly successful people. You need both. But if you have too much of one and not the other, you can see there can be trouble. I've always kind of thought about Joseph, like his EQ maybe isn't the greatest. His EQ sometimes is questionable. Because I think any of us put ourselves in his shoes and we're like, okay, I got this vision and it's powerful and I truly believe it comes from God. I know it comes from God. But I don't know if I should tell the room that, especially my brothers who are already jealous of me. And again, like some people read that better than others. But I'll say this, God never makes mistakes. And Joseph was not scared, and the EQ didn't keep him from doing what God wanted him to do. And so again, I think that's interesting. Another thing I think is interesting is he has a vision. He has a vision that comes directly from God, and he believes in that vision. And so throughout his life, we're going to look at kind of the twists and turns that it takes, but that vision is always there, and that vision can lead him. But again, faith is an action verb. He believed it all the way through. So as we kind of fast forward through the story, uh, then we go to verses 23 through 29. So we go down, his brothers are jealous, even his dad is a little bit, wondering about Joseph, and you think we're going to bow down to you, but life continues on. God continues to guide Joseph. He continues to direct his steps. And so if you pick up in verse 23, then we find the first kind of twist in his life. So Joseph is going out to see his brothers. He's got this coat of many colors that we've all learned in Bible school. And here he comes to go talk to his brothers. But like you remember, his brothers are not fond of Joseph. And in fact, they're jealous of him and they don't like him. And so Joseph came to his brothers in verse 23. They stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe that he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water in it. As they sat to eat down their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh. They were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother?" Because they were going to kill him. That's how much they hated him. They were ready to kill him. "Come, let's sell him to these Ishmaelites. We won't lay our hands on him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers all agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern. They sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. And then you also read that Reuben then tries to come back and find him, and he's gone. So the first twist, Joseph has a vision of what God's going to do with him. But again, it's not always what we want, it's what we need. And a lot of times we get those two things confused. So he's went from having this vision to now he's being sold into Egypt. And so then as he gets sold into Egypt, you kind of start seeing a little bit of a pattern with him. So you say, okay, if you pick up in verse 39, 1 through 5. I'm going to have to go here to my technology so I can get to 39. Genesis 39, 1 through 5. So Joseph is now taken to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who took him there. The Lord was with Joseph. Again, the Lord was with Joseph. One more time, the Lord was with Joseph. He was guiding his steps. And I bet in Joseph's world, you kind of wonder if he sees that. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him great success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became an attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household. He entrusted him to take care of everything he owned. So you start seeing a little pattern with Joseph. You can imagine, like, if you're in his shoes, he's like, man, I have this vision. I know God's with me, but yet here I am sold into slavery, away from my family, away from my father who loves me, away from everything I know. But yet God's with him. He's guiding his steps. So here he is in Potiphar's house. Potiphar, a good leader, somebody that understands people, says, you know what? This young man has something special. I'm going to put him in charge. So Joseph, at a very young age, gets put in charge. As you go on down, then we know that in verses 7 through 20, Potiphar's wife gets involved. Apparently Joseph is, maybe a handsome young man. She tries to make a play at him. He says no. She tries again. He runs off. Now he's in trouble. And so if you look at 39:21, so now Joseph, who's been at the top of kind of Potiphar's household, again gets kind of put through the grinder now with Potiphar's wife, maybe another test to kind of figure out where he's at. And he gets in trouble. And in verse 21, let's go back even further. 19, 39 verse 19. When his master heard the story of his wife, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him, put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those he held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So again, you start kind of putting like a pattern together. But put yourself in Joseph's shoes. Like that's the part that I think kind of hit me as I read this story this time. Kind of back to Brody Robinson. Is like we know the story, and it's saying and God was with him. But if you're in Joseph's shoes and you had the vision of what God's going to do with you, and you get sold into slavery, and you're doing everything you feel like is right, and boom, Potiphar's wife. Now you're in prison. For any of us that have been in prison or around prison or kind of understand, that's an easy word to say. That is a demoralizing feeling. And if you've been around people that have been in prison or visited prisoners, you get a much better idea of that. Because again, every right is taken away from you. So here he is in this circumstance. But God once again is with him. He's guiding his steps. He's prospering him. So now again, the head of the prison can see that. And along the way, Joseph just, from what we know, keeps doing what he's supposed to do. He keeps walking in God's light. He keeps believing in his vision. But if you put yourself in his shoes, that would be really, really hard to do. And so, once again, God is with him. Now, if we'll skip ahead to 40, then we'll look at the next twist and turn with the cupbearer and the baker. And so, the story with them is he's in prison, and if we look at verse 1, sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer, the chief baker, put them in the custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. Once again, we kind of go back to what we said earlier this morning in the class. God doesn't make mistakes. Sometimes they're mind-blowing to Jaxon, and I'm like, oh, light bulb. And God, he knows all that. He's the beginning, the end. He directs it all. He's the perfect orchestrator. So again, they're in Joseph's stead, of all places. And as they're in there, then they have dreams. I think we all know the dreams. You know, the baker's dream is a bad omen. Joseph has to answer both. But again, kind of going back to who Joseph is, Joseph is not afraid to tell people what they don't want to hear. Remember, his EQ doesn't get in the way of him just kind of saying what the truth is. And I'm telling you, sometimes that's a blessing, and we have to watch that. But if you remember back to the baker and the cupbearer, the news for the baker is really, really bad. You're going to die. The birds are going to eat you up. Sorry, man. Cupbearer, great news for you. You're going to end up becoming right back into your spot, and you're going to have all kinds of success. This is what's going to happen. So I think most of us know that Bible story. He interprets the dreams. Who helped him interpret the dreams? God. We've already seen that he's got a gift for this when he's a young man. And again, he believes it. He's got complete faith in what God's telling him through these dreams. And so, another little twist in the story. He tells both these guys their dreams. If you look at verse 22 and 23, you're just still kind of walking in his shoes, and you say, he restored the chief, just like he said, we'll go 21. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impelled the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in the interpretation. Verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So again, you're kind of looking at his story, and he's like, you know, I told you guys both this. This is something special I do. You know, in the heat of the moment, you can imagine, like, especially the cupbearer being like, man, I won't forget you. I'm going to make sure I remember you whenever I get over there because you did this for me. And yet he forgot him. Again, part of God's plan. Not what Joseph wanted. Not what Joseph wanted at all. You can just imagine he's hoping like at that time he's going to get out really, really quick. But the cupbearer forgets him. So now if you go 2 years later, and these were some things that hit me was time. 2 years later in Genesis 41. So a complete 2 years goes by. I've now coached for 2 years at Lamar Community College. And At 49 years old, it's amazing how much can happen in 2 years. Like just a ton of stuff. And it seems like a lot of times the busier you are, the faster it goes. But in his shoes, he's in prison. He sent this guy out there. By this time, you're like, man, he probably forgot all about me. But again, that kind of hit me 2 years later. So in Genesis 41, 1 through 13, now Pharaoh has a dream. Remember, the cupbearer is the guy that's giving Pharaoh his cups of wine. And so Pharaoh has a dream 2 years later. And then if you look at Genesis 41:16, oh, no, I don't want to start there. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So he has a dream. Let's go to about verse 10. So in verse 10, actually 9, sorry, verse 9, 41 verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was 2 years. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned. Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. I skipped that. Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants. He imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he had interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. So here we are, 2 years later. And again, you kind of think back to the twists and turns of his life. A vision when he's a young man of what's going to happen. Then sold into slavery by his brothers who want to kill him and hate him. He gets at Potiphar's. Again, he's doing things right, but he's elevated to somebody that leads in the household. But again, there's a different plan. Pharaoh's wife gets in the way. He gets sent into prison. All the things happen with the prisoners there. And so again, as you look at Genesis 41:16, Pharaoh's talking to Joseph. He's saying in verse 15, he says, I had a dream, no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And I thought about Jaxon. And I thought about Jaxon being in prison. And I thought about what my response would be. And my response through the flesh would have been, yes, I can interpret dreams, and you need me out of prison so I can help you. Please get me out. Listen to what Joseph says. Joseph says, the very first thing, I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answers he desires. All the credit to God. I can't do it, but God can. After all those years. And I thought, again, maybe that's been his heart the whole way. I know he had a vision when he was young to get to a certain point. But it just says a lot about, where his heart is with God at that moment. Because for me, I would have been doing everything I could to just please get me out of jail. His intent was to say, no, God can do it. I'll give him the glory. And so then as you read through the rest of that story, and he interprets it perfectly, and again, giving credit to God, whenever you look at Genesis 41:15 through 37, Pharaoh's dream, Joseph's interpretation, he tells him about 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. You need to plan accordingly. Everything is done exactly, like this is exactly what God sees. In verse 33, it says, and again, this is just the way things sometimes happen, is if you look at 33, he has not tried to do anything on his end other than give credit to God and also to give Pharaoh God's interpretation, not Joseph's. But then when you look at verse 33, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. He's not saying, take me. I should be the guy. He's just giving him God's interpretation, saying, you need somebody that can do that. So again, as you move ahead, in 37, the plan seems very good to Pharaoh and basically asks who should be put in charge. If you look at verse 39, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, and again, now Pharaoh even gets it. Since God has made all this known to you, not because you know it, God's working through you. And he says, you shall be put in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Joseph just became the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. And in my head, I'm sitting there thinking, like, again, you need to be over prepared and underexposed. And we think, yeah, I'm in on that. That's like, my guys are like that too. I'm like, okay, guys, we got to be overdeveloped and underexposed. Like, yeah, that sounds good. I want to do that. But do you know what that means? That means 5 days a week we do skills, weights, film, 3 hours of practice a day, study hall after that, 27 straight weeks of that. Then we go into our off season, and it's the same with us. We say, yeah, I want God to elevate me. I want to be able to be somebody that can give his message to other people. But a lot of times what we don't understand is the hard, the fire, the tough that he puts us through intentionally so that then we can be prepared for that moment. His moment just came. And just like us, he probably didn't even know it was coming. He was just doing what he did. He was just, again, walking towards that vision that he felt like God had given him. But along the way, it was not a straight line. We want it to be a straight line. A to B. There's my vision. Jaxon is right here, and he wants to be a Division I basketball coach. Okay, can you use God in that? Sure. Well, guess what? To get prepared to do that, you need to do a lot of different things, and it's going to be hard for us as Christians to be able to give the word to other people, to be ready for that moment when somebody at the supermarket says something that we all have the EQ to understand. I need to say something to her or him. They need his light. They need his love. They need to hear about his son. And we're prepared for the moment because of some of the things we have went through. It's not what we want. God knows exactly what we need. And so we'll move on a little bit longer, okay? Joseph's now elevated. He's completely prepared for the moment because of God. But now there's even bigger things, right? There's even bigger things coming. And so most of us kind of know the story. So because of the famine and all the things that are happening, it leads to something else. It leads